Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. And this is our first session for your review tutorial part 1. So this is session 1, and we also got one session tomorrow. And the agenda for today, I'll make some announcements about what you should really watch out for the coming few weeks, just to get some heads up. And then I will go over the Google Doc questions that you or your fellow student have posted. And then I'll take any question you can think of on the fly. That's basically the flow. However, before that, one of your fellow students asked some questions regarding the JUnit test assertion. So please go ahead if you can state your question again.
Hi, Professor. My question for the JUnit test is, so that say for assert true or false, and right after that, like we have to put some statements in the brackets, right? Yeah. But there are, say, many different ways that we can make the statements to be true or false. In your tutorial videos, like for our actual lab, do I actually need to follow exactly word by word, even if I can make another statement that assert true?
Yeah. Okay, good question. Good question. So the question was for JUnit assertions, which I put tons of assertions in the tutorial video, mainly for examples. So the question was, should you follow word by word with the assertions? Okay. I would say, okay, first of all, we know that for the names of the classes and method, it must be exact, right? So names and method, names of methods and classes, that's what I meant. So the names of classes and methods, they should be exact, because when we grade your lab 0, part 1, and part 2, we will actually run some automated grading program, which will assume those names. So this part must be the same, okay? And for the JUnit assertions, assuming that your JUnit test method, you have followed exactly the same name, based on point number 1. So I would say the short answer to your question is no. You don't need to type exactly the assertions the way I put it. As you said very correctly, whatever you put inside the assert true, for example, as long as the Boolean expression at that point of execution evaluates to true, is going to pass the assertion. And there are many, many ways to write assertion, to write Boolean expression to make it pass. However, this would be my advice, okay? So I would say follow, it's highly recommended, right? So you wouldn't get any marks deducted if you don't put exactly the same assertion as I did. As long as you follow through all the names for the classes and methods, you should be okay. But this will be my advice. So follow the assertions that I put and shown in the video. I think that those are somehow, I try to put it as complete as possible so you get a sense about if you were to write JUnit test cases yourself, should be the way you actually write it. You want to cover all the accessor methods, you want to test for all the mutated methods, and also you want to explore the difference between assert equals versus assert same, for example. So, and then follow at least the assertion I have put, and then you can, you are encouraged to, you can put some new assertions on your own. Okay, so that'll be my advice. Okay, so does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I think, excuse me, I think for this course, you in the lab, which I will give you more precise instruction from lab number 1, because for lab 0, part 1 and part 2, you're just following the tutorial videos. But for lab number 1 up to and including lab number 5, you will be given some starting test cases. Maybe you are given maybe 10 or maybe 15 just for you to get started. However, at the same time, you will be expected to write some additional JUnit test cases yourself. In that case, you can definitely put whatever assertions you like. So that's the opportunity for you to practice testing. I'll give you more guidance when I release lab 1, so you don't need to worry for now. I think for now, for the purpose of the first 2 weeks, just try to follow the review tutorial series part 1 and part 2 as faithfully as possible, and then you will definitely get a foundation you will need for the subsequent weeks. So that'll be my suggestion. All right. Okay, so that's the question I'd like to start with, and then I would like to make some quick announcement for all of you, okay, just to bring you up to speed about how the course is going, okay? So number 1, for your Lab 0 Part 1, officially released last Wednesday. So I'm hoping that if you have not completed that yet, at least you're very close. notice that it's due on this coming Friday, September 17th. But I would recommend don't really try to finish it only a few hours before the deadline. So I don't really want to rush that. And also, Lab 0 Part 1 is not that many classes and methods to build and to think about. So I think they're pretty straightforward in some way. Okay. What I really want you to do is to start your Lab 0 Part 2, which will be due next Friday, not the coming one, but next week, September 24th. If you can start by the end of today, that'll be awesome, because I think for Lab 0 Part 2, it definitely requires much more thinkings to understand the manipulation for the objects, especially we talk about reference type attributes, either single valued or multi-valued using primitive arrays. I think for those of you who haven't seen this programming pattern before, it might take you maybe some extra time to digest and also to think about what question you may want to ask me, right? So I would suggest for Lab 0 Part 2, try to start with that as soon as possible. You don't really just want to aim for submission on September 24th. You want to do it earlier, okay? And then to bring you a little bit into perspective, so you have access to this semester calendar over here, right? So we are now exactly over here. We are now September 15th, right? We are here. So officially Lab 0 Part 2, you should really start today. But if you start by the end of today or soon after that, that will be okay, okay? Make sure this Friday you will submit your Lab 0 Part 1 by the due time, the due dates, the time. And next Monday, I will release your lecture. Okay, so that will be, so some of you actually asked me the difference between tutorials versus lecture. I think to me, lectures are mainly based on slide presentation, maybe with some illustration on my iPad. Whereas for the tutorial, it's mainly about demonstrating how you can program on Eclipse, maybe with some visualization on my iPad. So for your very first 2 weeks, it's a little bit special. For week 1 and week 2, I just want to do some hands-on programming together with you, just to make sure you're fine with the foundation. Okay, but starting from week number 3, we'll go back to the more like a normal, like a standard mode of delivery for your course content. I'm just going to use lecture slides, and then maybe sometimes I'll give you some source code. I'll make some suggestion about what you can practice, and sometimes I might give you some source code, but it wouldn't be focused on Eclipse anymore, starting from week 3. Okay. And then for your lab number 1, so that would be your first lab exercise. That's not going to be well. You don't need to watch so many tutorial videos before you can get started. Whatever you have reviewed from Part 1 and Part 2 from the first 2 weeks, they will be you will be able to practice them in lab number 1. So that's why I want you to really finish your Lab 0 Part 2 as soon as possible. Just imagine this: if you somehow didn't really get started on Lab 1 until Lab 0 Part 2 is actually due, you already missed 3 days already. And notice that Lab 1 is actually due on Friday, October 1st. So you really want to give yourself enough time, like 10 days to complete Lab 1. So that'll be my suggestion, right? So guys, always look at the course calendar. It's pretty stable. There wouldn't be any major changes. So I would say really look ahead about what's coming, okay? Your very first test will be the written test number 1. It's coming in about 2 weeks, but I just want to mention that I'll give you some practice questions about maybe about a week before the test or earlier. But your written test number 1 is going to happen September 30th and October 1. Okay, so that one is for sure is going to cover your Lab 0 Part 1 and Lab 0 Part 2. About the review contents. There might be some lecture content as well, but I'll make the coverage precise when I give you the guidance. Okay. Okay, so that's about the announcement I want to make. So again, so these are the items you want to keep in mind. So they're happening soon at some point. Okay. All right. So before I go over the Google Doc documents, are there any? Okay, good. Okay, yeah. So. Guys, are there any questions regarding the administrative issues of the course before I start going over the Google Doc questions? Anyone? Okay, here is resubmission allowed for labs. Indeed, it is allowed. So basically, I think if you check on your lab manual, it is explicitly stated that you can submit for as many times as you like. Every time you make a new submission, it's going to override the previous submission. And only the last submission before the deadline will be graded. Okay. Is the whole course going to be remote? Yes. Okay. I have some private message over here. Let's see over here. Okay. Okay, over here. Okay, I think this is rather general. Okay, let me just, without mentioning the name of the students, this is a private message. So general question is, what would be your recommended study approach to review the required written notes? Good question here. Okay. I would say the following. Okay, so actually there are two written notes that are required. One is about declaring and manipulating reference type multi-value attributes. I would say this one is more emergent. Okay, so this one is actually discussed intensively in your part 2 of the review tutorial series. So the best way to do it is you can try to go over these notes before you start part 2, or you can go over that concurrently with your part 2. Doesn't matter. Okay, but eventually you have to finish going over these notes. I think this note's more talking about visualization, some theory, but I think once you do the lab 0 part 2, you can also bridge the gap. So you get both the programming and the theory covered. As for this particular written notes over here, okay, so this notes, I can tell you that this one may not be, will be required for your lab number 1, which is coming at some point, okay? So I would say go over this notes over here, and then make sure you understand the strategy it is talking about, and then you will get a chance to practice that for lab number 1 when it is released next Wednesday, all right? Okay, hopefully that answers your question. So I think for the written notes, definitely you want to read them first, and then to see if there's any part or sentences that actually doesn't make sense to you. In that case, post it on the Q&A, Google Doc, or get in touch with me, email, office hour, whichever means, and then you will be given chances to practice as I release the lab exercises. Okay. All right. So that's any more questions? Just about the course in general. Okay, good. So here are mutators and accessors the same as setter and getter? Yes, correct. So I think it's really a matter of preference about how you want to call. So let me just write it down. Okay, it's more about terminology, really. Okay, let me put it here. So this is how you should understand the categorization for the methods. Basically, we'll talk about methods in general. So one is constructor. There's only one purpose, for creating new objects. And of course, whenever you want to call the constructor, you must use the new keyword. That's number 1. Okay. So number 2, we also got accessors. Or it's also called it's also called getters. The reason that it's called getters is because usually you might say get products, get balance, or get number of entries, and etc. Right? You would usually use a get. It's just a convention. It's not something you must obey. It's just a convention for Java. Okay. For accessors or getters, it's actually for inquiring some information on the context objects. For example, you may have a person, you may have a person variable p, and then you might say p dot, for example, get BMI. So this will be one example for accessor call. So this is the context objects over here. So this is the context objects, and this is some accessor or getters. I can see obviously it's with a get prefix, and then it's going to return some value back to you, which you can either choose to print it out or try to pass to somewhere else or to do something else, right? Okay, finally, about mutators or also setters. Because typically in Java, if you want to declare mutators, you will start with a prefix set. For example, let's say you have a person object, you might say p.set weight. And then maybe set the weight to be, I don't know, maybe 189 pounds, something like that, right? So this is to say, you're indicating that you want to modify the attribute value for the context objects, right? Typically, modify attribute values of the context objects. Okay, so that's the principle. Okay. All right, I hope that answered your question about accessor mutators. All right, any more questions before I go over the Google Doc? Any more? Okay, guys, you're welcome, right, for the answers. Okay, so here, what does the attest in JUnit mean? Okay, so that's a valid question here. Okay, so the short answer is attest tag is actually for the Java running Java runtime machine runtime environments to know that they want to execute this method as a JUnit test. That's basically what it means. Okay, I can show you something here in just a moment. Okay, so here if I say add test, let's say in your class, let's say public class, let's say we have, let's say, test products, right? So that's the class from your part 1 of the review series, right? Let's say that. If I have a test, and then here I would say public void, let's say test products 1. Okay, and then of course I'll put some assertions over here. Okay, the fact that you have this attest associated with this particular method, so that means when you say run this class as JUnit test, it's going to execute this method as a JUnit test case. Okay. So what this really means is, and then I'll show you what if you don't have that test tag, what's going to happen. So what this will do is it's going to say the associated method will be or should be executed as a test case. On the other hand, that's something maybe I can show you quickly on the Eclipse. I think that'll be worth showing. On the other hand, let's say you missed the test tag, let's say, and then you simply say public and then void, and let's say you do some test p product 2, okay, and you have some assertions over here. Okay, I will definitely show it to you, but let me explain that in theory. Okay, you can see now we got 2 methods in the same class. One has the associated test tag, the other one doesn't. So now if I run this test product as JUnit test case test class, in that case only this will be run as JUnit test case, meaning that only the assertions inside this particular method will be executed. Let me write down the principle and then I'll show it to you. Okay, so the principle is over here: when running a class as a JUnit test class, only those methods with a add test tag will be executed for their assertions. Okay, so the principle, hopefully that's clear. Only those methods with a test tag will be executed for their assertions. Others will be ignored somehow. Okay. Okay, so I think, guys, let me show to you. So really to convince you, right? Am I going to post the notes after class? Indeed, I'll definitely post everything. Okay, so guys, I think if you're attending the session right now, you definitely don't need to worry about writing things on your notes unless you want to. So don't get yourself distracted. You can focus on what I'm trying to say here. Let me show to you right away. Okay. Let me now try. Let's say if I say add, let me say have a package over here. I'll also make the source code available to you. I want to have a new package. Let's say JUnit tests and finish. Okay. Just a brand new package, brand new project I'm creating. Let me say I want to say class. Let me just say example test example, just like that. Okay. I'm not really trying to test any particular class, just for illustration. Okay. If I say finish. Oh, actually, you know what? I beg your pardon. I missed the step. I'm supposed to create a new JUnit test class rather than regular class, right? Let me do it again. My bad. Okay, let me delete it. Let me do it again. New JUnit test case. That's what I meant to do. All right, and then make sure you choose JUnit 4 test example and finish. And of course, I gotta add in the library for once and for all. All right, so now you can see in this particular class, we got only one test, or we got only one method, which is the test method. That one has the associated tag over here, right? If I try to right click on this and say run as JUnit test, you can see only one, the only method will be executed, right? Let me just do another one. Okay, for example, let me copy this one here. Let me call that test number 2. Okay, and I was simply just not gonna have anything. According to your review tutorial part 1, I said that if you simply leave it empty, it's gonna consider as a success. That's not something you should do, but just for illustration. Okay. For now, I'm just going to include the test tag over here. All right. If I rerun the test, you're gonna see 2 tests, right? Test and test 2. What if I get rid of this tag over here? Rerun it. Only one is actually executed as a test case, right? You can see only this one that has the test tag has been executed. So I think that this phenomenon over here gives you the flexibility of not necessarily all the methods you actually put under the JUnit test class is supposed to be executed as a JUnit test method. Not necessarily. You have the flexibility of saying, for now, I don't really want to execute this as a JUnit test method. Maybe it's premature. Maybe it's simply some helper method. In that case, I don't put a test tag. But as soon as I put a test tag over there, in that case, it will be considered as for execution. Okay. If I rerun it, you can see now I got the 2 test cases over here. All right. So hopefully that's clear to you about the test tag. Okay. Okay, so here I remember vaguely from 1022 that we need to add an override to the toString method. However, in the tutorials, we did not add the tag. How much of a difference is it? I think the override tag you're talking about is mainly just for Eclipse to tell Eclipse explicitly that you are overriding this method toString. However, overriding will be automatically detected anyway if you spell the method name correctly. So I would say either you put the add override in Eclipse, or you don't put it, as long as you're spelling the toString method correctly, then it will be considered the same. So Wei, are you okay for that? Okay, very good. Good question. All right, guys, any more questions? You know what? How about hold your questions? Let me go over the Google Doc quickly. Right, there are not that many for the for part 1. Let me, first of all, I want to draw your attention to several responses. I can read them by yourself, okay, just for your information, okay? So now if you refresh the 2030 sites, you will see I actually distinguish between the Google Doc for part 1 and also part 2. So as you start studying the review tutorial series part 2, you should really use this document instead, right? Let me now go to the part 1. I just want to point out to you, so under the general section, I think that there are a good number of questions, excellent questions asked by your fellow student. Not really the technical contents, but just the more like a course design or administrative issues in general. The first one is about why are we using Eclipse, not IntelliJ, for example, right? I did give you give the responses over here. You can read it. I'm not going to just read it. And also, are the students from 1021 going to have any disadvantage? My short answer is absolutely not. I don't think so. This is why I really spent the time creating those review tutorials for the first 2 weeks. I'm just hoping that if you're from not even 1021, maybe you're from even 1720 from the digital media, or if maybe you simply just got some transfer credits, into York, so you're taking 2030 directly. I would say not taking any prior courses with me will not give you any disadvantage for sure. As long as you follow through the review tutorial series, part 1 and part 2, you will be okay, right? Okay, so number 3, Are we going to get some example question for written tests and programming tests? Yes, you will be given. So as the time gets closer, I'll give you preparation guide and practice questions. Yes, I will give them to you. Okay. And also the distinction between lectures and tutorial, I just explained that in the beginning, but you can also go through my responses, right? Okay. Okay, so now let me go over the other technical questions on the Google Doc. I'll go over them one by one. We don't have that many, about 3 or 4. Once I finish them, you can also ask me other questions, but feel free to interrupt me if I've discussed anything that you do have a follow-up to express, okay? All right, let's now go back to my iPad over here. Are these sessions recorded? Yes, everything I hold over Zoom will be recorded for sure. The Q&A, and if there's any extra sessions later, I might hold for helping you prepare for the written test or programming test. I'll record them as well, right? Okay, so now let's take a look at the first question here. Something about the toString method. Let's read through your fellow students' question. I'm a little bit confused as to why creating an accessor called toString will actually, how would it work, right? Like how does the compiler know that every time we try to print P, it should print what's returned instead? If you could elaborate this a bit, that will actually help, right? So the principle is very easy, okay? It's like this. Here, number 1, every class has an implicit toString method defined. And to be more precise, let me write down something here, which I will talk about in much greater details. To be more precise, the toString method is inherited from the object class. So the idea is, in Java, we talk about something called inheritance hierarchy. I'll touch upon just very lightly today, okay? So we have the so-called object class. Every class that exists, either from the Java API library or any class that you create on your own, like a products, or maybe entry, or maybe refurbished store, any class that you create, they will all be child classes of the objects, okay? So each class is a child class of objects inheriting all its methods. Okay, that's a principle. I will speak much more about the objects class when we talk about the equals method. So there are several methods you want to know in the object class that will be inherited to all the other classes. So one of them is toString for sure. And another one is equals. Another one is called hash code. In this course, we will definitely talk, we already spoke about toString, okay? And we'll speak about equals in much greater details later. But we may not have time for the hash code method. We may not. We'll see. Okay. So in the object class, the default behavior for the toString method. Okay, let me talk about the default behavior. Okay, for the toString method over here, the default behavior is it will simply return the address of this, right? Remember what the this keyword really means. That means the current objects, okay? Let me now give you a little bit more of comparison over here, okay? Let me now show you 2 versions of the same class, okay? 2 versions. Let's say version number 1, default behavior of toString. Okay, and then version number 2, I will talk about redefined behavior. of toString. I also illustrated such difference in the tutorials videos as well for part 1. So I'm just try to present that in a slightly different manner. Okay, so hopefully that can reinforce your understanding. Okay, let's take a look at version number 1. Let's say we're talking about, let's say, person class. Let's not worry about the public and private, right? Just for simplicity. Let's say class person. Okay, let's say the only attribute we have for the person is age. Integer. Make it easy. Okay, let's say that's it. So this is the entire definition for the person class. And as we learned from part 1, if you didn't have any constructor defined explicitly, there will be some implicit default constructor declared for you automatically, which will initialize the attributes to be its default value, right? That's something I also mentioned in part 1. Okay, let's now try to see how we can illustrate the behavior. If I say system, let me just create some objects. If I say person P, oh, I can even say, let's say, given name, Jim, is new person. Okay, just default constructor, which is implicit and also available to us. And now if I say system.out.println, if I simply say Jim, all right, just like that. Okay, so there are two things you should understand over here when you see this. Number one, this is something that will be handled by Java compiler. Whenever you are in the context of system.out.println, you want to print something out, right? Now, whatever argument you put over here, if that's a reference type, so this will be equivalent to, it will be as if you actually wrote Jim dot to string. It will be as if whenever you're passing any reference variable or any expression whose value is some reference type, in that case, it will be as if you try to call the dot to string implicitly at the end, even if you didn't put it in the actual code, but the way it will be executed will be to call the toString method. Okay, so now in this case, we haven't got any toString method over here explicitly redefined, right? So this will be the first case. So what's happening here? What's happening here is toString is not redefined in person. So the consequence is the address of Jim, or to be more precise, okay, the address stored in Jim is printed. All right, so that's something you also saw in part 1, right? Okay, hopefully you're okay with the first case. Let's talk about the second case. What if I try to have just another version of the person class, right? Let me just copy that. Okay, I got a person. Let me use a different color here. How about green? Okay, that's the second version. But now I want to expand the definition a little bit by redefining the toString method. Of course, Java, they actually have a specific term when we talk about redefining. It's called overriding. But I'll mention overriding later when I talk about inheritance. You don't need to worry about the word overriding for now, right? So I can say public string, and back to Faith's question. Wade's question. So do we need to put override the tag override in here for Eclipse? You don't need to. Okay, as long as you're spelling the name of the toString method properly, you'll be okay. Okay, toString. Okay, so here we can simply say return some string value over here. Okay, let's say it's easy as integer age, right? Whatever age it is, plus years old. something like that. Okay. So this is our second version of the person class. Okay, and then let's now try to analyze the same block of code that we can potentially do as a tester. Okay, let me just now copy that into here. Okay, over here, and then I'm going to make it maybe green, like that. Okay, so let's now consider for the second version. Okay, when I create a gym, new person, right? I'm really using the implicit default constructor for the green class over here. And when I say system the out print line, gym, okay? Again, number one, since gym is used in the context of the system the out print line, so it would be as if you said gym.toString. And in this case, since you actually got some redefined version of the toString, so the one that's default, printing out the address will not be used anymore. It's been redefined already. So what's going to happen is it's going to say Jim is how many years old. That's what's going to happen. Okay. What's going to happen is the redefined version is called. It's actually called. And this is the redefined version. And of course, I'm not being very careful over here. The default constructor will only initialize the age to be 0. So maybe before you actually say system.out_print line Jim, you may want to insert a line over here to say Jim.setAge, maybe to be 23, for example, right? That's something I'll rely on you if you want to try it out on Eclipse. You can also say here Jim.maybe setAge. You can declare that, define that mutator method very easily, for example, 23, right? So that'd be more proper. All right. Okay, here we got some follow-up over here. Can we assign value to an entity in return step? For example, return age equals 2. I don't think you can. So you're basically saying if you have some accessor method over here, for example, let's say string to string. And you may have some definition over here, and you're saying, can we do something like this? Return age equals 2. I don't think this will be valid because return over here is really expecting some string value to be returned, right? Expecting some string value. On the other hand, this expression you suggested, this one here is actually in a variable assignments, which is not going to give you some string expression. So that's not going to work. But I believe in a language like a C, that would be allowed. Because in that case, if you do it in C, I believe you say age is assigned to 2. It can also be used as an expression of value 2. But I don't think that's the case in Java. So don't do that. Okay, so that's about the toString method here. Okay, I just talked about the 2 different versions just to elaborate more on my part 1 of the tutorial. Okay, and then so here your fellow student has been thinking about this question, and he's wondering if perhaps it is similar to how constructor work for classes. Not really. Okay, so I think the way the toString method is going to work is like this. Let me recap. Okay, in the object class, where every class that you declare, or every class from the Java API library is going to inherit. Part of the method, part of the inheritance will be the toString method. So that means if I have a class on my own, if I didn't explicitly redefine the toString method by declaring and redefining that, in that case, whenever I try to say objects.toString, it is going to call the default version, which is going to print out the address. On the other hand, if I explicitly redefine the toString method in my own class, in that case, whenever I say system.out_print line, some objects variable, that's going to be equivalent to object variable.toString, which will call this particular one, which will be not the address. Okay. Okay, any follow-up question to this particular question here? Anyone? I can see some raised hand. Yes, please, just go ahead.
Professor, you said that object, the toString is inherited to object class. So let's say if we have another string, right? And if we want to print that string as well, so do we have to use override method, or we can use this toString?
Okay. Okay. Let me. You can help me understand your question. So, are you talking about? Okay, let's say use this example. Are you talking about the toString method over here?
So let's say we have one parent class, which is object class, but inside of and we are using two child classes, which is like person1 and person2 class. So if we want to print the string of both the person's age, then can we override this toString method, or do we have to use the different method name?
Okay, you may want to help me out a little bit. I'm not exactly sure I understand. Okay, so let's say we got a class over here, person.
So this one is the first child class, person1.
Okay, so let's say we got a class person. So can you suggest what you're thinking?
So our parent class is the object class.
Yes, that's okay.
And
yeah.
Inside the parent class, we have two child class, which is person1 and person2.
What do you mean inside the object class? Actually, okay, object class, yes, it is a parent class for every class in Java for sure. But its definition is already frozen, meaning that you cannot have any classes inside. You cannot do that.
Okay.
So I think maybe the way you want to think about it is like this. Well, this will be covered in much more systematic way, after reading week when I talk about inheritance. I can think about if I declare this person class over here, that means I have some inheritance relation. Person will inherit from the object class. That's basically what's happening over here. Okay. So now there are two choices for you regarding the toString method. Either you can inherit the toString method directly. It can be simply inherited. And the way to inherit that is I simply don't redeclare or don't redefine the toString method explicitly in the person class. And that's exactly this case over here. Okay, that's case number one. For case number two, we still got the object class over here. And then when we declare the person class, it automatically inherits from the person class. Automatically inherits from the object class. And then, so now let's say in this case, we always got the toString method version that's in the object, which will print out the address for the context objects. But now we might decide to say we want to redeclare the toString method again. In this case, we want to make it redefined. So this will make sure when we call, for example, p.toString, where p is of type person, that one is going to call this version rather than this version. Do you think that might address your question?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Okay. Okay. No problem. Okay, guys. Don't worry too much about the inheritance I'm talking about over here. I will elaborate the inheritance a little bit more when I speak about the equals method before the reading week. But after the reading week, we'll speak about complete story of inheritance. Okay. Just bear with the pace. All right. All right, if there's no more follow-up question to this question here, I'm going to go on to the next one. Okay, so this is more to do with how we can implement a method, let's say accessor method, which is supposed to return a string, right? Remember in the product class for the toString method, I suggested 3 possible ways you can implement it. I would say as far as this course is concerned, they are equally acceptable. Okay, either you can simply use the plus, the string concatenation, right? Let me just put it here. Okay, just summary. So how do you implement, okay, let's say implementing an accessor, or of course, getter, returning string value. Okay, So the three approaches I spoke about in the tutorial, you can feel free to use any one of them. One wouldn't give you advantage over the other two. Okay, let me just talk about, just recap very quickly. One is you can use the concatenation operator. And just the plus. Okay. Number two, you can use the StringBuilder class. So that's part of the Java API. I also show you how you can do it. Okay, that's another one. Number three is about using the string.formats. And then you can put two different arguments over here, right? You can look back to the toString method for the product class. And I would say this one is interesting. This one is actually more like a legacy feature from the C language, because Java is considered part of the C family languages. So in the C, okay, so this is mainly from C. Okay, if you program in C, if you haven't, that's okay. You're going to learn about it in 2031. So you will see the formats feature, or like a function in there. Okay, it's mainly from C. That's why Java is also supporting that. Use it when the pattern of return value, string value, of course, is complex. For simple ones, you don't necessarily have to do string.formats, right? But I think for your products class, I think the toString expected value is reasonably complicated. That's why I also showed you how you can use string.formats. That's another way to do it. Okay, and the question itself from your fellow students was mainly about, is there going to be any advantage or disadvantage when I use but one but not the other, or vice versa, right? The answer is no, as far as this course is concerned. But I want to give you a little bit more details about later on. If you have to deal with large string values, then you may want to make a wise choice, okay? So my suggestion would be, you want to use the StringBuilder, use this if the return string value is large size. And when I talk about large size, I really meant it may contain maybe 1 million characters inside, right? A very large one, right? And then on the other hand, if you got a large size string value to really return, what to compute internally, you don't really want to use a concatenation operator because that will give you some overhead in terms of the speed because of a wasted space. Okay, I'll give you some illustration quickly. Okay, but there's something I will also touch upon later towards the end of the semester. I will talk about asymptotic upper bounds for computation, and one of the example I will use is about how you can process strings by using concatenation versus StringBuilder. Okay, just bear with me with that example. But for now, I'll give you some intuition. Okay, and for concatenation, space is wasted in intermediate computation. I'll give you an example. Okay, let me just give you an example here. Let's say if I have, let's say, string S, string S is assigned to, let me use a very cliche example here. Let's say hello world. Hello, hello plus world plus there. Okay, we pretty much know what the output string should be, but let's now analyze more closely about how this will be, how S, the final value that will be stored in S is going to be computed, right? What's going to happen is, at the runtime, we're going to process this concatenation to there will be there will be two concatenation to be done in total. Let's see exactly how. Okay, what's going to happen is we're going to step number one, we're going to, first of all, have this hello ready. Okay, and step number two, we're going to perform the concatenation of hello and row. It's going to process from left to right. Perform hello concatenated with world. And this will definitely give you some intermediate string, which will be stored somewhere in the memory. Hello world. Okay, let me emphasize that. So this is some intermediate result. Intermediate result stored somewhere. Okay, and what about the final step? The final step is we're actually going to concatenate the hello world. I'll just say HW so you will know what I'm saying. Hello world plus there. And then that one is going to give you hello world there, right? That's a final outcome. Hello world there, right? So we got these three steps. Apparently, you can see this intermediate steps over here to store the intermediate result is kind of waste of space. That's just how the concatenation will be done. So in the case where the string value you're dealing with is very huge, in that case, this intermediate result will be occupying lots of space in the memory. That will slow down your computation. So that's why concatenation is not so much recommended if you have to deal with large-sized string values. Okay. On the other hand, for the StringBuilder, I wouldn't say too much. It's a library class. The way they're going to deal with it is not by wasting any intermediate strings to be stored in the memory. What they will do is they will simply just keep appending characters into the string array that they store internally, and then they will be very efficient. Okay. But again, as I said, for this course, you don't really have to worry about the StringBuilder being computationally more efficient than using concatenation. For this course, you don't need to worry about, but just to keep in mind. Later on, beyond this course, if you have to choose a way to implement your string return value, you have to choose wisely. All right. Any follow-up question to this particular question here? Anyone? Okay, I hope it does make sense. Okay. I see one raised hand. Is it from before or you got some new question? Oh, okay. You lower your hand. All right. Okay, any more question about concatenation versus StringBuilder, right? May not be directly relevant to the course material, but I think it's worth your knowledge about the to know in Java. Okay. Okay, this one's done. Okay, this one is a very quick clarification, right? So in one of the videos, I spoke about how to visualize object creation, right? So I spoke about this memory diagram over here where each region of the starting has some starting address for the objects. This will be one example. This will be another example, right? And then the question was, let's say here for P. So this is P, right? So P is storing the address of this particular new product's creation, right? So the question was, does P actually store the address of the product objects? That's correct. Or does it point to the address of the object in memory? That's not the case. Okay. Maybe your fellow student was having some confusion with the C language. So in Java, you can store the address of some objects, but you cannot store the address of some of the objects. You cannot have that indirection. No, you cannot. Okay. So definitely this is the way. Okay. And a little bit look ahead. When you study over the tutorial part 2 for this week, I will talk about the phenomenon of aliasing, right? Reference aliasing. Reference aliasing. Okay, I wouldn't say too many details. You're supposed to study the video as actually cover in much greater depth. Whenever you see like a V1, some variable is assigned to V2. And we are talking about V1 and V2. They are of the same type for now, okay? The same type. And also, they're, to be more precise, they're both reference type. In that case, you're creating reference aliasing by doing this variable assignment, but exactly how, you will see the video about explaining how it should be done. Okay, but to be very quick verbally, what we're doing is we're copying whatever object address that is stored in V2 into V1. Diagrammatically, it's going to be visualized as V1 is now going to point to wherever V2 is pointing to. If you're not too sure what I really meant, see the video. You will see complete details. I just want to mention that quickly. Okay. Any question about address, about reference variables, and etc.? Any follow-up question to that? Everyone's okay? Okay. Okay, I believe that's the last one. Okay. I think this one may be some confusion about the choice of the variable name. I can mention that quickly. Why do we use P for testing the overloaded constructor? Shouldn't we use P2, P3 as defined on the product app? By using P on all the test cases, like all the test methods, is that not going to interfere with the P defined for the default constructor? Okay, I think your fellow student might be a little bit confused with the variable scope. Okay, let me give you an example here. Okay, to answer this question here, again, let me repeat partially the product class. Okay, so we got the class products. And then we're going to have, let's say only the string model, okay, and etc. Okay, and then let's say we have our product constructor, public products. Let's say we just have the default constructor over here. Let's have another one. So let's say I'll just create some new method here so I can illustrate the point. Okay, so if I say public over here, let's say get. How about set model? I think that'll be good. The way I want to set a model, so this one is not really appearing in your part one of the tutorial. I'm just making that up here. Let's say what we want to set a model of the current product to be some string value, rather than passing a string. So let me just next events. Rather than passing a string, why don't we simply pass a products? P. Okay. What I really meant to do is, after executing this method on the context object, I want to set its model just to be the same as p.model, right? That's what I want to do. So I'm going to say this.model is assigned to p.model. But the main thing I want to highlight to you is I'm using the variable name p over here. Okay, so that's for the product class. And then on the other side, I'm going to create the JUnit test class or the method to show to you. Okay. Let me put it here. Oops. Okay, let me now have, let me make it a little bit smaller. Okay, maybe a little bit too big. Okay, another one, let's say we talk about a JUnit test class, right? Let's say we got our class, let's say test products. And then let's now declare two test methods, right? Remember, we got to use the add test tag. So public void. Let me just say test1. Okay, and then here I can say products P is assigned to new products. And then I would say products P2 is assigned to new products. And of course, any code I wrote on my notes, you're encouraged to try them out if you have any doubts on the Eclipse, right? You got Eclipse installed on your machine, you're definitely free to try any program you like. Be curious, okay? And then I can now say p.set model over here. It can now, let me make it a little bit more general. There might be some lines of code happening in between, okay? And then I will say p.set model, and then I will say p2. Okay, like that. And then I might have some assertions at the end, right? So that's the first test method, okay? Hopefully you're fine. And then I'm just going to make this smaller, and then I'll copy that. I'll make another test to illustrate a point. Okay, that should be good enough. Okay, and then let me copy that and make a new test. Okay, I might just need to make it even smaller. Yeah, bear with me. I will set it up properly so you will see the point. Okay, good. And this one here, let me make it blue. Okay, they're different tests. And of course, this one should not be test 1. It should be test 2, let's say. And then, okay, so now we got P, P2, we got P2, right? So now you can see how many occurrences of P do we have. We got P here, we got P here, and also we got P2 over here, and also we got P2 over here. So are they going to interfere with each other? The answer is no, for the following reason. Okay, you got to think about the execution flow for the JUnit test cases. Okay, so when we try to run test result as a JUnit test case, right? When we right click on that and also run it as a JUnit test case on Eclipse, it is going to execute test method by test method, one by one. After the execution of each method, all the variables will be flushed out, meaning that they will be reset. So there'll be no interference. Okay, that's very important to note in case you didn't know that from the first year. Okay, so now you want to know that after executing each method, all its local variables are flushed out, or more formally, reset. That's point number 1. Okay, so that means this P over here and this P here, they will not interfere with each other for sure, depending on how you define them, right? So you can think about each test method will be executed in isolation, okay, for local variables. Another point I want to make is this. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is about, what about this P over here and this P over here? They're also not going to interfere with each other. The reason being, when you execute this particular fragment of code, it is actually going to call the constructor over here. That one's okay. And then when you call the set model over here, it's actually going to pass the P2 over here. So that means the P over here will be replaced by P2. Right? That's how I trace the program in your part 1 tutorial. So the P over here is not going to be interfered with the P over here, because the P over here will be replaced by P2 because it's the method arguments. Okay, let me write it down. Will replace the P in set model. No interference. Okay, so that's about the answer to this question here. Any follow-up to that? Okay.
Can I ask a question, a different question?
Yeah, sure. Before you do that, so any follow-up to this question specifically, I want to make sure. Okay, sure. Okay, hearing none. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's about page 7 of the building an Apple refurbished store app in Java PDF file.
Okay. You mean the notes, right?
Yes. the lab 0.
You mean the lab manual or the iPad notes?
iPad notes, I think.
Sure. Page 7, you said?
Yes.
Yeah, what about it?
Okay, so to the right, like you have create 2 objects, right? And you have shown like to create for the constructor to create objects. There are actually 3 steps, right?
Yes.
So and the one in blue is the default constructor, right?
Correct.
Where like all the variables are set to default like its default values.
Default value, correct.
And the lower one, which is in red or pink, that's the one that we actually give some arguments that so that the constructor can create an object with some variables.
Some values, yeah.
Yes. So I've seen that in your YouTube videos that when you draw that diagram or graph, like my understanding is that when the constructor creates different variables, it's going to create one after another in an order, right?
Yes.
But when you give it like some values for some variables, the way that you draw it seems to me that if I give a variable or like a value, then the constructor will create that variable first, and then other variables that are not defined.
Okay. Are you referring more specifically to the blue or the pink in this case?
The pink.
Okay. Which variable you said will be created before they were which variable?
Okay,
you mean like
so
these variables?
Yes, say for the pink, the model is now set to iPad Pro 12.9.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. Yes.
And 1,289. That is the value that we gave to original price, right?
Yes.
So if I go back to the blue one, so which is the default constructor. So the way for the default constructor to is that we create each attributes like with one by one. Like the first one we create is model, the second is finish, the third is storage, right? Like one after another. And then let's go back to the pink. So now since we only have 2 attributes that we gave value, right? The other attributes, they have default values, right? So for the constructors to make to create objects and to give each variable each attributes its values. So does it still follow the same order? It's gonna create model,
it's gonna be I understand your question. Thank you. I got it. Let me try to address this more properly. Let me just copy what I got for that.
Because when you when you drew this in the YouTube videos, it seems like that you're gonna create those values that you define, and then the other value, those attributes that you define its value, and then you're gonna create other like attributes that are not defined.
Okay, let's now go back to here. Okay, so that's the fragment of code you're talking about. Let's now talk about this one's, actually, let me just go over it very quickly. This one here versus this one over here, okay? For both cases, the object structure, like a skeleton, must be created first, okay? And how do we create an object skeleton? It should be based on the set of, the list of attributes you have in the template, okay? So what's gonna happen is, in both cases, let's say when we do the green one, okay? When we do the green one, we're going to create a new object of type products. And specifically, we're going to call the constructor. You can think about before we call the actual code in the constructor, the object box has to be somehow allocated in the memory. So now for the green one, it's going to be products. And then how many compartments we got, depending on how many attributes we got over here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the 6 attributes. For example, for the model, you're going to get null by default. So I'm talking about what's going to happen even before we execute the body of implementation for the constructor. Okay. And also we got finish, which will be null. Also we got storage, 0. Cellular connectivity, which will be false. And also original price will be 0.0. Discount value also 0.0. Let me just copy this object so I can reuse it for later. Okay. Okay, so this green object is created even before we actually execute the body of implementation for the default constructor. Okay, it's now created, and then and now how do we do this part here? Is do nothing. So that means nothing will change about the default values. So they remain to be default values. In the video, I didn't quite distinguish between these 2 steps, but eventually what you will get is for the default constructor, since you don't do anything to initialize the attributes, you will just end up having all the attribute values being default. And then, of course, the address of this object will be stored in P, right? So that's a green one. And the way we handle the pink one here will be similar, okay, in the following way, okay? So let's say, how do we handle the pink one? Again, we know that we're going to create products objects, and then we're going to call this particular overloaded version of the constructor. So now, even before we execute the constructor to set some values, even before that, as soon as we know that we're going to create an object of type products, we're going to have something like this already, like that, right? It's just different objects. All the values will be default to start with. Okay, that will be set by the system. And then when we try to execute the body of the implementation, we know the context object is actually P2, right? So it's going to be P2, the model P2 dot original price. They will be set to these 2 values specifically. So we'll do this one first to do model change. So it will be changed from null into this. And then for original price, it will change from 0.0 into 1289.00, right? And then P2 is pointing to it. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, now I got it.
Okay, good. Yeah, I agree with you. It would be a little bit better if I could have said for both of these cases, some default objects will be created based on the default values of the attributes and also based on how many attributes you got in the class. Yes, it will be. And then, depending on the particular implementation body you got for each constructor, they will set the values in a different way. Yeah, that's really the whole story.
Oh, I see. So that means that the default constructor will always be used, right?
Well, oh, yeah. So default constructor doesn't do anything. So that's why the default object you got will just remain the same. So that just appear to the external world. It's just default values.
And which means that, say, for the pink constructor, so if we really want to trace like all the steps, we will actually see that all the attributes will be set to default values, and then some of them
good question.
will be set to a certain value, right?
The answer is no, you wouldn't. Let me show you exactly. Let me create a simplified version of classes for your full understanding. Okay, that's a good question. Let me now just do new and then package. Let's say model. Let me create some class. Let me use a different class over here. Let's say person, just easier for me to set up. Let's say person class, and then let's have 2 attributes, integer age and also string name. Let's say public person. So this is the default constructor, which does nothing. Okay. And let's have another one, the overloaded version. Person over here, let's say integer age and also string name. Okay, this the age, this the name is name, right? That would be similar. Okay, just a simplified version. Let me now create maybe some console apps, right? Let's say person app with the main method. over here. Okay, let's now try different versions. Okay, let's say person P, P1 is new person. That one calling the default constructor. And also, of course, control space, I got to import it. Okay, person P2 is new person over here. Let's say 23. Let's say Jin. All right, good. Let's now use a debugger to help us understand. Okay, of course, after that, you can also try system the outer print line. Maybe you would say P1 plus P2. It's just P1. That will definitely print out their address. But I can play with the toString method if you wish. Okay, but let's now focus on these two lines mainly. Okay, let me put a breakpoint here. Okay, so if I launch the debugger, okay, switch to debug perspective, right? So now you can see that under variables, we don't have P1, P2 just yet, because now we are at a point right before executing this line over here. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to step into. So the step into will try to step into the execution for this default constructor, right? And then what we're going to see as soon as I say step into, I'm going to see this particular default objects right away, right? So that's actually created based on the list of attributes I have in that person class, and also all the attributes will be set to the default value. That'll be the starting points for every constructor. Okay, let me just illustrate that to you. Now, if I say step into, so now I'm now in the default constructor. You can see the context objects this, age, and also name. They are both of default values, 0 and null. And now I'm not ready to execute any additional lines. I would like to set the attributes, if any, inside the constructor. But the default constructor has none, so they remain to be 0 and null. Okay, that's the case for default constructor. Let me step over and let me now go on to P2, right? So what I will do is I will step into again. In that case, I will switch the context into person constructor, the overloaded version. Now, as soon as I say step into, I'm going to see just the same default objects with all the default values. It's just the starting ground for every constructor. That's what we will see. Okay, and then if I say step into, you will see that we haven't executed anything yet, so only starting point. You can see under this, we got age and name. They are the default values, like the default constructor. But now the difference is we got additional 2 lines for us to modify the attributes. That's just how the overloaded constructor has been implemented. And if I try to say, okay, now you can watch out for age and name, right? Watch out for those. If I say step over, okay, not yet. If I say step over, you can see age has been modified to 23. If I say step over again, name will be modified to Jin, right? So that's kind of the process. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. Anything else you want me to clarify regarding this example?
Oh, yes. So I just want to make sure that I understand it correctly.
Yeah.
So for the overloading constructor, it's still the first step is still to do with the default constructor, right? And then whatever
implicitly, yes, you can think of that like that. Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that when you during the debugger process, when you trace all the values of the attributes, like the first say for the second one, the overloading construction, in the beginning we still see default values for age and name, right?
That's correct.
And then for each steps after that, we will see the age is changed to a value 12,
exactly.
Or name is changed to Jim, right?
That's correct.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, think about it. Yeah, exactly. Let me recap your understanding. There are 2 phases for every constructor. Phase number 1, it will be the starting ground for the default objects with all the attribute values set to their default values. Phase number 1. That's true for every constructor. And phase number 2 will be to execute the implementation, however lines there might be inside the constructor.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, no problem. All right, guys, I think I covered all the questions on Google Doc and everything on the chat. Do you have any other questions?
I had a quick question, sir.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I was following the Apple shop. So
yes,
I have a question. Like there is an accessor method called getPrice with you implemented. So
getPrice. Okay.
You created a local variable price double.
Yeah.
And then when doing the computation of price, you used the this keyword original price minus the discount value.
Yep.
So my question was, since we have already accessors of original price and discount value, why not use those methods instead? Or it's a best practice to use this original price and this discount price?
Okay, I see your question. Good question. Thank you. Let me now switch to my other workspace for you guys. Give me one moment. Let me set it up. It should be the workspace over here. Okay, let me open that. Yeah, bear with me. Okay. You are basically talking about in the product class and the getPrice method. Okay, let me just go there.
Yes.
Yeah, I know exactly what your question is. Yeah, thank you. I got it. Okay, good. You're you were asking, so here, when I say this original price, I'm definitely referring to original price for the attributes over here. You can see it can be traced all back to here. And similarly for discount value. You were asking, since we already got the public accessor method, like a get original price, for example, it can be get original price over here and also dot get discount value. Why not do this, right? That's your question.
Yeah, without the this, I guess. Is the this necessary? I don't know.
Actually, I would say, okay, so here is my advice over here. In this scenario, since our only intention is to get access to the attribute value, and we are really in the very class, like a products, where these two attributes are defined. So in that case, it would be easier if you simply just say this dot original price and this dot discount value. Is the most efficient way to do it because you're just basically looking at the field in the memory directly. On the other hand, if I say this dot get the original price, it would be a method call, which might have slightly more overhead whenever you want to make a method call, because you're going to create some memory burden on the stack of your memory of the record. So that would just cause a little bit more burden, but it's not really killing. So I would say in this case, you can either use this, that's absolutely fine, or you can use this. So here's my second advice. When should you actually use the accessor method as opposed to just maybe attribute name? I would say if the accessor method involves maybe certain computation. For example, let's say if I, let me just say hypothetically, the original price, let me just hand wave a little bit to you. So you can see the get original price. Now the implementation is very easy. You simply just return the attribute value over here. But let's say maybe you might decide, rather than having just returning the attribute value, you might actually decide to have some complicated computation inside the method, which will take several lines of code. In that case, whenever you want to get a original price, you definitely should actually say get the original price, which will reuse all the lines of code you declare in that method. Does it kind of make sense to you?
So you would only call that when you want to use all the computation
all the computation inside the method. Yes. So you should only make a method call. How about, let me make it this way. Since this is a very special context we are talking about, this is the class products where the two attributes that we are interested are declared. This is where they are declared. So that's why it will be the most convenient and efficient if you simply say this dot original price and this dot discount value, rather than calling the methods, which will give you some computational overhead at a runtime. Okay. So when should you actually invoke a method? In principle, you should only invoke a method when you want to reuse its lines of code in the implementation. But just it's very good thoughts. I would say when you actually go over part 2 of the tutorial series, I will speak about, for example, I'll give you a little bit heads up here. So when you actually go over the refurbished store class, which I declare in part 2, in that case, when you declare the add entry method, I will give you 3 different versions of the add entry method. What I do is I will give you some initial version for the 3, which got lots of duplicates for the lines of code. And the best practice will be you want to define lines of code only in a single place. And then for all the other places, you will just call that particular method as a helper method. So you will see that example when you get through part 2.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, no problem.
That clears up my time.
I think it's good. It's good thoughts. It's good thoughts. Okay, let me just undo it to here. All right. All right, guys, we got about 2 minutes before 1 p.m. Do you guys got any questions? Okay. Question?
Got a quick question, but it's because I know time's limited. It's very quick.
No, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I don't get, because of our separation of concerns, we want to separate everything from console apps and separate from the model. But
Yes.
in the possible scenario where we could have that main method in our console app, it's not good like form, but if we could do it, does it just like go through the class itself? Because usually when we do it from the console apps, it goes through the whatever class we create, and then it creates the actual object. But we can create an object in the class itself where like that. That's like
Okay. Yeah, I would say, yeah, I see what you mean. So in Java, so I think I try to really kind of guide you through the pattern, which I believe, based on my judgment, will be the most clear to everybody. So I guess what you're suggesting is this: in practice, I'm pretty sure you have seen some Java programmers, for example, when they declare, let's say the Java, let's say product class, right? Once they declare the product class, they might also declare some main method in the same class. So they can turn this class directly into some console application. I would say doing that would be okay, but to me, for maybe beginner students or even intermediate students at a level, it could be a little bit confusing because you're mixing both for the modeling purpose and for the console application purpose into a single class, which we really don't want. So I think separation of concern would be a better way to go, meaning that whenever you really want to have a class with a main method, only do the main method in that particular class and put it in the console apps package. And if there's any other model class you want to refer to in the console app, you will use the import statement to import it from the model package. So that'll be the practice I would suggest.
I totally agree with you. But when like that, I don't know if you want to go into it. If you don't want to go into it, okay. But
you know what? How about this? I also need to run to another meeting. So if you don't mind, feel free to ask me the question during my office hour. You're more than welcome to join.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No problem. Please just drop by my office hour. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you for coming. And then that's it. If you got any further questions, feel free to join tomorrow's session if you want to. Otherwise, I'll see you next Wednesday. All right, guys. Take care.